Today I'm going to show you how I play against the Sicilian Defense using a GothamChess opening that I learned years and years ago from an old GothamChess course, the A3 Sicilian, the Mengarini variation. And I've been using this like online up to like a 2400 blitz level, over the board up to like 2200 level with fantastic results. Now, unfortunately, my opponent doesn't play knight c6 or e6, which would allow the gambit lines with b4. But after d6, we can kind of treat this somewhat like a Vienna. And typically, this gets to kind of a positional game where, there's not fireworks blazing or anything, which is typically what Sicilian players want. For the time being, we're going to try to exert as much control over d5 as we can to stop my opponent from playing d5. And he goes for this g6 line, which is, well, there's a few ideas to it. Firstly, he's trying to exert as much control over d4 as possible, because that is often one of our future plans, to play something like knight back to e2 and c3, d4. But for the time being, we can kind of just develop as normal. We can play this f4 in kind of like a Grand Prix attack style, which it has a multi-purpose. One of the ideas of f4 is in the future potentially to play pawn to f5 to play against this e6, sorry, the g6 pawn. And often this pawn will come to e6, and we can try to use this f5 move to break open this diagonal for our light squared bishop. Or f4 is also a good move, because in the future, black may play moves like e6 and d5 to force the move pawn to d5 through. And typically in the Sicilian, that's considered a major win if black is able to play pawn d5. But in this system, which we are playing, this f4 move is in part designed against d5 if we can't stop it, which black can force it, because then we can meet it with e5 and avoid a trade of pawns in the center, which keeps alive more attacking opportunities, which if you've watched some of my previous videos, you will know in this opening. And so we support a move like e5, we can kick this knight away from the defense of the king, we can potentially play c3 and d4 and get this really cool pawn chain, because the f4 pawn makes playing e5 far easier. But okay, for the time being, we're just going to continue developing. Knight f3, castles, normal moves, right? What is interesting about this type of setup, in my opinion, is our dart squared bishop. I don't really like developing the dart squared bishop unless there is a clear path to like an aggressive square. So, okay, yeah, b5, that's fine. We'll drop our bishop back to a2. We justify the move a3 with bishop to a2 because it's incredibly safe and it's not vulnerable to any knight c6, knight a5 ideas, which is typical in lots of different openings, particularly things like the Italian. And my opponent goes for this fianchetto setup. I'm going to play king to h1 because it's just a good habit. We always have to watch out for the move d5 now, and king h1 is designed to get off of this diagonal to avoid any problems in the future, which we have seen in previous videos where I haven't played king h1. We've often gotten ourselves into a little bit of trouble with queen b6 sort of moves. We have to watch out for d5, particularly with bishop b7 now on the board, lending extra support. And we need to ensure that e5 can be played if d5 is played by black, because we don't really want the center to open up. Not right now, anyway. So one of the things I like to do here is play something like knight to e2 and knight to g3, which is designed to, one, prepare pawn c3 to exert control over this d4 square and potentially prepare the move d4 ourselves, but mainly to support the f5 pawn push, because let's say black plays something like, I don't know, queen b6, knight g3, rook c8, and pawn f5. I don't think that's a good sequence of moves for black, but it looks relatively normal, right? If black takes and we get something like knight takes, we're probably completely winning. the knight on f5 is just insanely powerful, targeting the dark squares around the black king, particularly with the black bishop being fianchettoed. And it also like leans into the idea of not developing the dark squared bishop for the time being, because if we were to be able to execute something like that, then we could potentially bring our bishop into a square like g5 or h6 in one fell swoop, rather than bringing it to like d2 first and then over to h6 in the future. I also like the bishop on c1 because for the time being it keeps an eye on b2, which could be vulnerable, particularly because we're moving the knight away from the diagonal that this bishop is targeting. So this is a very multi-layered sort of opening, and I really, really enjoy it. Okay, knight to d7. I don't understand that move. I mean, it looks like he's trying to play f5 to stop us from playing f5, but he can't because of the pin. Now, if we go c3 and he goes king to h8 to prepare f5, let's say knight g5, threatening f7, pawn e6. Well, then he can't play f5 anyway. Knight g3, h6. h6. What do we do against h6? Because if knight f3, he still can't play f5 because e6 hangs. Okay, interesting. I'm trying to think whether he's trying to play f5 before we can execute it to counterattack, but I don't think he's able to because of knight g5 ideas and the power of our light squared bishop. One of the other potential issues with black developing this bishop to b7 is it can become quite good. I have certainly lost games because of the power of that light squared bishop fianchettoed on the long diagonal. But the bishop does serve a good purpose on c8, making it harder for us to play f5. Because, for example, f5 right now I wouldn't play. Because after take, I mean, we have a pawn on f5. I don't want a pawn on f5. I want a piece on f5. My e4 pawn is important, being on e4 and controlling important squares, and potentially coming to e5 in the future. So, is there an issue with knight g3? I don't think so. f5 can't be played. If e5, then f5. And that looks very strong. Very, very strong. c3 is a move I do want to play, but I don't feel a rush to play it. And this is what I was saying with keeping this bishop on c1. If our bishop was on d2, for example, in this position, if our bishop was on d2, we would first have to address the problem with the b2 pawn. Now, that can be easily addressed with a move like rook b1. That's very common in these types of structures. I've played that a lot in a lot of different positions. But here, by having our bishop already on c1, we don't have to waste time defending the b2 pawn because it's already defended. So I will probably play c3 in the future, but I don't have to right now. Okay, e6. So that makes f5 more difficult to execute because we would have to take with the pawn. And like I said, I don't really want to take with the pawn. Okay, so what happens if I play c3? d5? Maybe f5 makes sense if d5? We've had these types of positions before in a very recent episode of the speedrun, I'm sure. Okay, but can f5 be played anyway? So, there was a video I posted maybe 5 days ago where we had a similar type of structure, and my opponent was making it as hard as possible for me to play pawn f5 because, of course, it's a very scary looking move. And I said that if there's a move that looks impossible, but it can be played anyway, then most of the time, that's going to be a really good move to play. Because black's position is built around stopping it, but then if it happens anyway, then the position can completely crumble, potentially. Now, in that game, I was actually able to play f5 upon analysis, but I didn't because I couldn't see the line. So I'm going to try and calculate it. So if f5, take, if take then knight takes, fantastic. That much is clear. So I assume he will take like this. Okay. Then let's say he plays knight to e5. That looks natural. Maybe we can play a move like bishop to g5 with tempo on the queen, followed by pawn f6. There's no f6 for him because of the pin. Okay, that's interesting. So f5, take, knight e5, bishop g5, queen d7, pawn f6, bishop h8. I feel like that has to be good. Let me think. Okay. There are potentially some ideas of bringing the queen into g3, but I can't seem to make them work. Okay, what if we are patient and play pawn c3? Now the move well, no, he can't play d5 yet because I just win a pawn. So we can't play that yet. So c3, how does he prepare d5? Let's say knight e7. Control over f5 and d5. Okay, so he's preparing d5 with that. So c3, knight e7. Can I play f5? Take. Well, no, let's say e takes. Knight e7, pawn f5, take. I don't think he'll take again. I think he'd probably leave it. But then something like bishop g5, pinning the knight, preparing pawn f6, looks strong. Tough to say. G5. Take. I'm gonna go c3. I can't seem to make pawn f5 work. What do we need to make pawn f5 work? Or should we even try to play it? If d5, do we just go e5 and try and build the pawn chain on the dark squares instead? And give away the f5 square for the time being? I mean, for the time being, obviously he can't play this because we just win a pawn. And I will happily take that. Okay, he does go knight e7, which did look like a very natural move. Okay, what happens if we play pawn d4? Pawn d5, pawn e5. f5 isn't going to happen for the time being, but is that a big deal? I don't know. Maybe that's our attack gone. We do also close off his bishop, though, and this bishop. They become basically useless. Maybe that's a good trade-off. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. Again, I should consider the move f5. I just don't really know. Oh, hang on. Wait, no, maybe f5 does make sense. Hang on a minute. f5. If take, everything opens up against the black king. And if he takes like this, then still everything opens up against the black king. And knight h5 is an idea. I think f5 makes sense. And you know, I'm not even going to calculate it all the way, because I think it's the situation where it looks impossible, and therefore I should play it. The computer may tell me I'm an idiot, but this seems very difficult for black to navigate, because the best he gets out of this is one pawn and a ruined kingside structure, which doesn't seem like a good trade for him. Particularly with all my pieces pointed towards the black king. I mean, my bishops are pointed, my rook's pointed, my queen's pointed, my knights are ready to jump in at any moment. And he has, let's say, 4 defenders. I might have, what, 6 attackers? And you could even include the pawn in that. f6 is maybe an idea in the future. Okay, what happens if he goes pawn d5 and tries to ignore me? I kind of refuse to... Oh, yeah, he does go for it. I just kind of refuse to believe that works. What does he do on knight g5, for example? With pawn h6? Can he play that? Maybe. Take... No. Because if take, then take. 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 Yeah, that's completely winning. So knight g5. If he takes on f5, I've just added another defender. I'm also preparing to bring the queen in, to g4 or h5. That's got to be good. Got to be good. We can also consider bishop g5, but I don't think it's as potent. Because knight g5 has the immediate threat of taking on e6. And you can't kick the knight away, because this comes with tempo, and if you take back, I'll take. So if knight g5, how do you defend? How do you defend? How do you defend? If you play pawn e5, can you play pawn e5? It just looks wrong. There's got to be something for us there. Even if it's just taking on g6 and opening up the f-file. F takes. Well, then the d-pawn is pinned. Also, I have knight to e6, and I at least get the bishop. At the very, very least. Yeah, this has to be a good move. Knight g5. ef5. ef5. That just looks really good. I'm going to play it. Now, one of the things I don't like about knight g5 is the fact that it doesn't allow us to play bishop g5, which is useful for pinning this knight and potentially preparing moves like pawn f6, which could be good. But I think that is a sideshow right now. I think that it's more important to clarify the situation of the pawns. And it's a funny old position, like with so many pawns staring at each other and just nobody wanting to be the one to take. In the video that I posted a few days ago, again, in this type of position, I didn't consider queen b6, actually. I don't think a single pawn was traded, even though there was so much pawn tension in a similar fashion, which was quite interesting. Okay, queen. Okay, what happens if I take? Not thrilled. I don't think I get enough out of that. If I take on g6, and he takes with the f-pawn, looks flimsy. Queen g4 ideas look strong. What if I play queen g4 straight away? Because I can't play take and then queen g4 because this just looks wrong. I don't want my knight on f1. I also don't really want to trade a pair of rooks because he can bring the second rook in much more easily than I can because my rooks aren't connected. So what if I play the immediate queen to g4? Threatening to take, probably. And also mating ideas. Like, I even have a... Wait. No, sorry, I can't do that. But queen g4 also threatens this. After king takes, queen h4 picks up the knight. Also threats of f6. So if queen g4, I'm also defending e4 and f5 by doing that. If h5, can I take? Take? I'm just mating, probably. Also, my bishop comes in. That's got to be good. Queen g4 looks right. If queen g4, knight to e5 or f6, let's say f6. Yeah, because e5, then we can play f6 in the future. So knight f6 defends h7 as well. Let's say queen h3. I think that's good. Because we're going to have situations where we can take and then deliver a check. Or a checkmate. So queen g4 looks really good. a knight e5 looks wrong. Although you're forking the king and the d3 pawn, I don't really care about d3, because the knight on e5 might be allowing the move f6, whereas if the knight comes to f6, then obviously you blockade the pawn. Such a funny position. 16 moves in, there has been no captures so far. 0 captures, even though there is so much tension between the pawns. Like, there are so many different captures that could happen in this position right now, but all of them seem wrong for the side that has the ability to capture, right? Like, I would love my opponent to take on f5. Yeah, no, that's got to be losing. That has to be losing. Queen h3, pawn h6, pawn f6. I mean, I just don't see how that position holds. Even... Oh no, then maybe bishop... Oh no, then I can take... So here, you know, I can even, like, play take and take or something. But I think queen h3 is easier. So we're threatening mate in 1, so he has to deal with that. I think knight e5 is a losing move. I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but, you know. Okay, what if h5? Well, then just f6. This is the problem with knight e5. It looks like you're the one making the threats, but giving me the opportunity to play pawn f6. Okay, well, that's just mate in 1. Okay, well, GG. That was a very interesting game. Kind of unfortunate it ended in that manner. I would have loved to have seen a move like pawn h6 and pawn f6 and have some fireworks here. I still think it's completely winning for us. I don't really see how black holds on. Like, let's say take. I don't even have to take here. If I don't want, I could take here. I could even just take on g5 and say, well, you're still forked. And we are just completely winning, actually. Because we're going to take on g7 with threats of mate, and if you take, then bishop f6 with forks and threats of mate. So it looks completely lost no matter what, but it would have been more interesting. But yeah, I mean, like, checkmate in 18 moves. Only two pawns were captured. The pawn on f5 and the pawn on h7. That's a very interesting game. Let's jump into the analysis, see what the computer has to say. So for those of you who choose to stick around for the analysis, I guarantee this will probably be more educational than the game itself. Because I'll hopefully also show you how to analyze in the correct sort of manner. So, okay. 90.3% accuracy for us, according to Game Review, and 68.7% for our opponent. So, obviously a short game, so the accuracies are kind of up in the air. But we have a Sicilian Defense. I avoid all the main lines of A3. I have a playlist linked below with all the games I've played in the Mengarini Sicilian. So if you want to see like what happens after knight c6 and b4 and take, and c3, knight c6, d4, this is one of the common lines. I have games in the playlist below. Or if you want to see what happens after e6, b4, take, c3, bishop e7, d4, d5, e5, these types of positions, which I love, by the way, you can also check that out. But my opponent goes d6, and here b4 doesn't really make as much sense, because it doesn't really do anything, and also e4 is weak, and black can just say, okay, what are you going to do about this? And then I don't have pawn e5. So if black were to play a move like h6, for example, then b4 is like a bit better, although I probably wouldn't play it. After like knight f6, I've got e5, for example, and this is very good for us. We can expand in the center very quickly, take on c5, play d4, have a very nice game. Of course, people are not going to play h6, but that's just why d6 is good, to stop pawn e5. So knight c3, just developing. Knight f6, bishop c4, getting on this diagonal quickly. Pawn g6, pawn d3. And this type of setup from black is generally considered the refutation to this setup. I beg to differ. I have played so many over-the-board chess games against really good players, like, you know, 2,200 players who have played this setup, and I've beaten them. Now, okay, was that necessarily just because of the opening or just because I'm some genius? No, it's going to be a mix of lots of different factors. But it's completely viable, is what I'm saying. I have a positive record with it. So, okay, bishop g7, pawn f4. And one of the ideas of f4 is that if black goes e6, for example, trying to play pawn d5, I will drop the bishop back to a2 to start with. e6 is basically always met with bishop to a2. Point is, if you play something like knight f3, then after pawn d5, you basically have to trade off your bishop. And the computer likes this because it finds a way to go pawn e5. But I don't really like these positions. Personally, I like my light square bishop. It offers good attacking opportunities. So I prefer... Bloody hell. Please? Hello? Here we go. So after e6, I prefer bishop a2. Because after d5, I can play e5. And I still have my light square bishop. And you might be saying, Alex, it literally can't see anything. Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. We will execute the same kind of plan. We will drop the knight back to e2, play c3, d4, and then the bishop can come back to b1 and get on this long diagonal where it can be incredibly effective. So there's a clear plan of action for getting the bishop back into the game if this diagonal gets shut off. But that didn't happen in the game. Knight f3, pawn a6, castles, b5, bishop a2, bishop b7, and here the engine wants f5 immediately. And if take... Okay, let's say d5 for the sake of argument. Queen e1. Okay, let's say pawn d4. Knight e2 and like knight c6. Queen h4. Oh, we're just going for bishop h6 ideas. c4 the engine wants. Oh, it just wants to build up the attack very slowly, but it thinks we have way too much pressure. That's very interesting. I've never played f5 for that sort of purpose. And I mean, of course, if we play f5 and black doesn't take, then fantastic. If black just continues normal moves, we can just take here. And, like, this is going to be very scary. Like, knight g5, even the engine likes. And if pawn e6, queen e1, it thinks we're completely winning very quickly. I guess the rook can get involved, the queen can get involved. There's lots of attacking opportunities. But I went king h1, just getting the king off of this diagonal. Knight c6, knight e2. Again, the engine wants the immediate f5. Knight d7. Again, the engine wants the immediate f5. For the same kinds of reasons, I assume. Let's say... Okay, sorry, you can't play that. Let's say pawn e5. Okay, then we take here. Let's say the knight comes to e5. Knight g5. If h6. Knight h3? Is this the plan? Knight f6. No. Knight g3. Queen d7. Bishop. Okay, I guess we just keep the pawn on f5 to make it very hard for black to move. But it doesn't feel like done and dusted, you know? It's interesting, though. I went knight g3, because normally I like to support f5 with the knight, and also potentially the rook. So pawn e6 stops f5 for the time being. f5 is playable. And after take, the engine wants bishop g5, which is an idea that I considered. It does find bishop f6 for black. And after take, if queen to b2, fg6, and apparently we have incredibly good play after knight h4, because the pawn is pinned and we have so much pressure. Okay, I go pawn c3, which the engine thinks is the best move, just making sure b2 is never a problem, and also it's kind of a waiting move. So knight e7, as I expected, because it looks very natural. And here I execute f5, and it is the best move in this position. It just felt like it has to be played. I don't know, like, I could delay the move f5 longer, but I felt no need to. Like, okay, black can't go f5 himself, that's not a problem, but I don't know, like, d5, the engine wants e5, and now the plan shifts, I assume. And I thought f5 would be very strong. Now, if black takes, which is the best move, and we go e takes, and black goes knight takes, and we take and take. Black wins a pawn. But I just could not see how this was a tenable position. The engine likes d4 here, stopping knight to e5, I assume. And let's say we get a trade. Okay, knight takes, going after this. Whoa, okay, no human would take like that, though. No human takes that knight. Let's say knight e5. And the problem is our knight just gets to f5. And as I said, if the knight gets to f5, the position is basically lost. Because it's just such a strong piece. In tandem with the bishop and potentially the queen, it's going to be a big problem to defend those dark squares. So my opponent goes d5. Here, okay, knight g5 was my only bad move of the game. It wants fg6. This is a move I considered. I thought if hg6, then we were in great stead, because we can just go for this. But I wasn't a fan of fg6. That was my issue. Because I was like, well, I don't know, this doesn't quite look right. I felt like I was letting black off a bit. The engine wants d4 here, which was definitely not a move I considered. If take, then we take with check and knight g5, and you can see how this looks very nice. But obviously you have to see that from a previous position. So fg6, d4. Best move for black is queen b6. And then e5. Why is this good? Why can't knight f5 be played? h4 or knight g5. Okay, it's interesting. It's not as clear cut as I would like. I would knight g5. Here my opponent went queen b6, which is the best move, giving more support to the e6 pawn. And I go queen g4, which is a good move. The engine approves. And here I was expecting the move knight to f6. And this is a bad move. I was going to go queen h3, which is the best response. And if a move like h6, then I mean f takes g6. There's different sacrifices to be had. I assume we can do something like rook f6. Yeah. And if like take, we have mate. And there's just so many different problems for black. And if a move like fg6, we can just go nab the pawn. And here we have way too much pressure, basically. Like, there's so many things going on, and the black king side is probably just going to crumble, realistically. So in this position, the best line for black is ef5, ef5, and then h6. And the reason you can't go h6 immediately is because of fg6. And if fg6, okay, then we take on e6, yeah. So the point is that first you liquidate the weakness of the e-pawn, and then you kick the knight. But even so, we're still doing very well. We can just drop the knight back, and you can't really take. This is completely losing, because, okay, we can take on f5, but queen h3 is the better move, and I mean, there is just way too much pressure. There's way too much pressure. I assume knight h4, yeah, that's always the move, no matter what black plays, basically. And you can't defend f5. So let's say, I don't know, bishop c8, knight h4. Okay, no, here it's not the best move. Okay. Knight h5 is going after the bishop. And yeah, h6 is just going to be so weak. And the black pieces are just scrambling. Like, knight f6, take, queen takes, game over. So, I don't even know. Like, queen g6, knight g7, king g7. Here the engine likes rook e1, but let's say knight h4, which looks natural to me. And here the best move is like queen h7, just trying to defend h6. And f5 no matter what, but this just looks miserable. But yeah, my opponent went knight e5, queen h3. I was between queen h3 and queen h4. They're basically the same. But I chose queen h3. Here I was expecting h6, in which case I was going to play f6, which is the best move by a country mile. The point is, if I move my knight, then black's okay. Like, take, let's say I take back, black's actually better here after d4, d4, ef5. So I have to act quickly. So f6 straight away, because I can't let black open up the position for his bishops, right? Then black will be able to get his pieces back into the game sufficiently. And as I mentioned before, if hg5, then we can take here, or we can just take on g5 and maintain the fork. And the black pieces are just so weak. So like bishop h8, fe7, rook e8, engine likes rook d1. I don't know if I would play rook d1, but rook f4 looks nice. Trying to come into h4. And here the engine just wants to sack the... Wait, sorry. No, it changes its mind, because now it thinks that's mate. The one's like f5. I mean, yeah, this just... It is not going to last, is it? It is not going to last. So my opponent took on f5, and we mated him. So that was, yeah, a little bit anticlimactic, but my opponent's a good player. You know, 1770, almost 1800. He's a good player. He's better than most of you watching. I'm not saying that to offend anyone, but that's the fact of the matter. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see the game that I kept referencing throughout this video, of the other game we had in the Mengarini Sicilian and a similar sort of setup, then check out the video up here. It will help to kind of like gauge more of the ideas of this opening. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.